I'm Tara Holloway, 28, and literally last Thanksgiving, my role as the family caretaker? Yeah, it totally backfired. The bond I'd worked my butt off to keep solid with my grandmother Lillian? It blew up into a full-on family betrayal at our so-called happy holiday dinner. My parents, those image-obsessed phonies we all know, straight up demanded I go along with their latest scheme, and when I clapped back, the room went dead silent. "You're tearing this family apart!" My mother shrieked, with everyone staring like I'd just kicked a puppy. But here's the tea. Their cruelty didn't break me. It lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying justice you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost unreal what I'd do once the truth unraveled. I've always been the odd one out in my family, the one who didn't fit the glossy mold my parents Diane and Richard polished to perfection. They're the kind of people who'd rather post a curated family photo on social media than actually talk to us. Me? I'm a nurse, the kind who stays late to hold a patient's hand, who memorizes their stories because it makes them feel seen. It's not glamorous, but it's real. My hands are rough from sanitizing wipes, my eyes tired from night shifts, but my heart's full from knowing I make a difference. Lillian, my grandmother, gets that. She's 78, with laugh lines deep as canyons, and a voice that wraps you like a warm blanket. She's the one who taught me what family should mean. Love, not likes. Thanksgiving was always our thing, hers and mine. Every year I'd drive to her little house in the suburbs, where the air smelled of sage and her old oak table groaned under dishes we'd cooked together. This time, though, my parents insisted on hosting at their sterile McMansion, all marble counters and no soul. I should have known something was off when Mom called me 3 days prior, her voice syrupy sweet, saying, "Tara, darling, we're doing it big this year, a real family affair." I gripped my phone, my knuckles whitening, because family affair with them meant a performance, not a gathering. Lillian was thrilled, though, her eyes sparkling when "Oh, Tara, a trip to Europe with everyone? I can't wait," she'd said, clutching my hand. I didn't have the heart to tell her I smelled a rat. The week before I'd been slammed at the hospital, 12-hour shifts, a patient coding, another crying because she missed her kids. I was running on coffee and adrenaline, but Lillian's excitement kept me going. I'd sit on my break, scrolling through her texts. Should I bring my blue scarf for Paris? My chest tightened. Paris? That was new. Mom had mentioned a family trip to Europe, but details were vague and I hadn't pushed. I should have. I was too busy wiping down IV poles, charting vitals, and dodging my parents' calls. They'd been texting about the dinner, all "bring your best self, Tara, and don't embarrass us." I rolled my eyes, tossing my phone into my locker. Their version of best self meant a dress I couldn't afford and a smile I didn't feel. The night before Thanksgiving, I stopped by Lillian's to help her pack. Her living room was a time capsule. Faded photos on the mantel, a quilt she'd sewn when I was a kid draped over the couch. She was folding a sweater, her hands trembling slightly when she looked up at me. "Tara, this trip, it's my dream. Your grandpa and I always talked about Europe." Her voice cracked, and I hugged her, her frail frame warm against mine. I didn't know then that my parents had already cashed out her savings, $47,000 she'd scraped together over decades, for a trip that was never meant for her. I didn't know they'd leave her at the airport alone while they jetted off. But that night, as I tucked her quilt around her shoulders, I promised myself I'd make this Thanksgiving perfect for her. I drove home, my old Honda rattling, and stared at my ceiling until dawn. Something gnawed at me. Mom's fake laugh, Dad's shifty eyes when I'd asked about the itinerary. I shook it off, blaming exhaustion. I was Tara, the nurse, the fixer, the one who kept things together. I'd handle it. But as I pulled into their driveway the next day, Lillian's hand in mine, I felt the air shift, like stepping into a room where a fight's already brewing. The table was set, the turkey golden, but my parents' smiles were too tight, their voices too loud. I squeezed Lillian's hand, her fingers cold, and told myself it'd be fine. It wasn't. The gravel crunched under my tires as I left my parents' driveway, Lillian's hopeful smile still burning in my mind. I was already dreading the Thanksgiving dinner, but the weight of it didn't hit until I was alone, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Growing up, I'd always been the invisible one, the kid who didn't fit their Instagram perfect narrative. My parents, Diane and Richard, had a knack for making me feel like I was failing some unspoken audition. I'd spent years chasing their approval, only to watch them fawn over my siblings' shallow wins while my own were brushed off like crumbs. I remember being 16, standing in our old kitchen, my hands still damp from washing dishes. I'd just won a scholarship for a nursing program, a full ride based on my grades and volunteer hours at the local clinic. I was buzzing, my heart pounding as I slid the acceptance letter across the counter. "Mom, Dad, look at this," I said, my voice high with pride. Mom barely glanced up from her phone, her manicured nails tapping the screen. "That's nice, Tara," she said, not even looking at me. Dad was worse. He grunted, eyes glued to a golf game on TV. Meanwhile, my sister Lauren's C-average report card got a framed spot on the wall because she'd landed a modeling gig for some local boutique. "That's our star," Dad had said, ruffling her hair. I stood there, letter in hand, feeling like I'd just shouted into a void. It wasn't a one-time thing. At 19, I graduated top of my nursing class, juggling night shifts at a diner to cover books. I invited them to the ceremony, hoping maybe this time they'd see me. Lillian was there, front row, her hands clapping so hard I thought she'd bruise them. "My Tara, saving lives," she'd said, her voice thick with tears. My parents, they showed up late, Mom in a dress that screamed, "Look at me," Dad checking his watch, like he had somewhere better to be. They left early for Lauren's influencer event where she posed with some energy drink nobody bought. Lillian hugged me after, her perfume like lavender and home, whispering, "They don't deserve you." I wanted to believe her, but it stung. Then there was the time I organized a fundraiser at 24, raising $10,000 for the hospital's pediatric wing. I'd spent months planning, skipping sleep to call donors, my fingers cramped from typing emails. The local paper ran a story, even put my picture in it. Me in scrubs, smiling with a kid who'd just gotten a new wheelchair. I sent the article to Mom, thinking maybe this would matter. Her reply? A text. "Cute, but don't let it go to your head." That same week, they flew to New York to watch my brother Ethan's art installation. A bunch of spray-painted skateboards he sold for thousands to rich hipsters. They posted about it for weeks, calling him a visionary. I deleted the app from my phone that night, my chest tight with a mix of anger and exhaustion. Lillian was the only one who ever saw me. She'd call after my shifts, her voice steady through the receiver, asking about my patients, remembering their names. "You're doing God's work, Tara," she'd say, and I'd feel my shoulders loosen. She'd tell me stories of her own life, raising my mom alone after Grandpa died, working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Her pride in me wasn't loud, but it was fierce, like the way she'd grip my hand when we'd walk through her garden, her fingers calloused but warm. She never cared about the spotlight, only about what was real. My parents, though? They lived for the flash. Mom's social media was a shrine to their perfect life. Lauren's photo shoots, Ethan's gallery openings, their own charity galas where they'd pose with oversized checks but never actually volunteer. I was the glitch in their narrative, the daughter who chose scrubs over stilettos, who'd rather chart vitals than chase clout. I tried to bridge the gap, inviting them to hospital events, hoping they'd see what I did. They never came. "Too busy," Mom would say, her voice dripping with fake regret. Dad just stopped responding altogether. As I pulled into my apartment that night before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Wear something nice tomorrow, no scrubs." I tossed it onto the counter, my jaw tight. I wasn't just the invisible one anymore. I was the one they wanted to erase. Lillian's voice echoed in my head, her words from years ago. "You're enough, Tara. Always." I clung to that, but deep down, I knew tomorrow's dinner would test me. I didn't know how much. I didn't know they'd already taken Lillian's savings, her dream of Europe, and turned it into their latest con. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt it, a quiet resolve building. Whatever they threw at me, I'd protect Lillian. I just didn't realize how far I'd have to go. Lillian's hand trembled as she passed me a mug of chamomile tea that night before Thanksgiving, her living room glowing soft under the lamplight. I'd stopped by to check on her, my heart still heavy from the dread of my parents' dinner. She smiled, her eyes crinkling, and said, "Tara, you're my rock." That moment, sitting on her worn couch, her words sank into me like sunlight after a storm. It was then I realized she wasn't just my grandmother, she was my anchor, the one person who saw me when the world didn't. Our bond, built over years of quiet moments, became my strength, and I knew I'd do anything to protect her. It started when I was a kid, maybe 10, sneaking to her house after school to escape Mom's lectures about my unladylike genes. Lillian never judged. She'd pull me into her kitchen, where the air smelled of bread and possibility, and teach me to knead dough, her hands guiding mine. "Life's like this," she'd say, pressing the dough. "You keep working it, even when it fights back." Those afternoons were my sanctuary, her stories of resilience stitching us closer. She'd talk about raising Mom alone, waitressing until her feet bled, saving every penny for a future she dreamed of sharing. I'd listen, wide-eyed, feeling like I'd found home. By 18, when I chose nursing, Lillian was my cheerleader. My parents scoffed, saying I'd wasted my potential for a lowly job. Lillian? She showed up to my first hospital volunteer shift with a thermos of coffee and a handwritten note. "You're already saving lives, Tara." I kept that note in my wallet, creased and fading, a reminder of her belief in me. When I worked night shifts during nursing school, she'd call at 3 a.m., her voice groggy but warm, checking if I'd eaten. "You can't save the world on an empty stomach," she'd tease. I'd laugh, my exhaustion lifting, and tell her about my patients. Mr. Jenkins, who'd joke through his chemo, or little Amy, who drew me stick figure cards. Lillian remembered every name. The real turning point came 2 years ago, when I was 26. I'd been at the hospital, bone-tired after a 16-hour shift, when Lillian called, her voice shaky. She'd fallen, bruised her hip, and was scared she'd lose her independence. I rushed over, ignoring my aching feet, and found her on her couch, eyes wet. "I don't want to be a burden, Tara," she whispered. I knelt beside her, my hand on hers, and promised she never would be. That's when I started spending more time at her place, helping with groceries, fixing her porch step, or just watching old movies. She'd pat my cheek, saying, "You're my heart, kiddo." Those words were my fuel, my shield against my parents' disdain. Last spring, I noticed Lillian talking more about her dreams, Europe, specifically. She'd pull out a shoebox of postcards, ones Grandpa had sent her during the war, and trace the Eiffel Tower with her finger. "We were going to go together," she said, her voice soft. "Now, maybe with you and the family?" Her hope gutted me, because I knew Mom and Dad didn't care about her dreams. They'd roll their eyes when she mentioned it, calling it cute, but impractical. I started saving my own money, thinking I'd surprise her with a trip one day. I'd stay late at the hospital, picking up extra shifts, my back aching as I lifted patients, my eyes burning from charting. Every dollar went into a secret account, labeled Lillian's Dream. I didn't tell her, wanted it to be a surprise, but I'd catch myself smiling at work, imagining her face when I'd hand her the tickets. That night, as we sipped tea, she brought up the Europe trip again, her voice bright. "Your mom says it's all planned. Paris, Rome, all of us together." My stomach twisted. Mom hadn't shared details with me, and Dad's texts about the dinner were oddly vague. I brushed it off, blaming my paranoia, but my fingers tightened around the mug. Lillian's trust in them was so pure, so fragile. I looked at her, her gray hair tucked behind her ears, her smile wide as she talked about packing her scarf. I wanted to protect that joy, to keep her safe from whatever my parents were scheming. I didn't know then, they'd already drained her savings, $47,000 she'd saved for decades, promising a trip they'd never deliver. But as I hugged her goodnight, her frail arms strong with love, I felt it. A fierce need to shield her, no matter what tomorrow brought. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke with a knot in my stomach, the kind that twists tighter the longer you ignore it. I'd barely slept, my mind replaying Mom's too-sweet voice on the phone, Dad's evasive texts about the family trip. I stood in my cramped apartment, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my eyes shadowed from another late shift. Today was supposed to be about Lillian, about her dream of a family united, but the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm you can't quite name. I pulled on a navy dress, simple, not the designer nonsense Mom wanted, and headed to Lillian's, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I braced for the dinner at my parents' house. I found Lillian in her kitchen, humming as she packed a tin of her famous pecan pie. Her hands, knotted with age, moved with purpose, and her smile was so bright it almost eased my dread. "Tara, you look lovely," she said, brushing a stray hair from my face. I forced a smile, my chest tight. She was dressed in her best cardigan, a soft green that matched her eyes, and a scarf she'd mentioned for Paris, loosely knotted around her neck. "Ready for the big day?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. I nodded, swallowing the urge to warn her about my parents. I didn't have proof, just a gut feeling, and I couldn't bear to dim her light. We drove to my parents' McMansion, the kind of place that screamed money but felt like a museum. The lawn was manicured to death, the windows gleaming, and I could already hear Mom's voice, loud and performative, through the open front door. Lillian squeezed my hand as we stepped inside, her fingers warm but fragile. The dining room was a spectacle. Crystal glasses, a turkey so perfect it looked staged, and a centerpiece of roses that probably cost more than my rent. Mom swept in, her heels clicking, her smile as plastic as the table runner. "Tara, darling, you made it," she said, air kissing my cheek. Dad followed, his tie too tight, his eyes darting to his phone. "Lillian, you look quaint," he said, barely glancing at her. I felt my jaw clench, my nails digging into my palms. The table was set for 8. Me, Lillian, my parents, Lauren, Ethan, and their plus ones, who I didn't even know. Lauren was already posing for a selfie, her hair a cascade of curls, while Ethan scrolled through his phone, muttering about some gallery deal. I helped Lillian to her seat, her steps slow but steady, and tucked her scarf over the chair. "This is going to be so special," she whispered, her eyes shining as she looked around. I wanted to believe her, but Mom's laugh was too sharp, Dad's posture too stiff. They were playing parts, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. As we sat, Mom launched into a speech about family unity and this once-in-a-lifetime trip to Europe. Her hands fluttered, her diamond rings catching the light, and I caught Dad smirking, like he was in on a joke I hadn't heard. Lillian leaned forward, her hands clasped, hanging on every word. "Paris first, then Rome," Mom said, her voice dripping with excitement. "We've got it all planned, thanks to Lillian's contribution." My stomach dropped. Contribution? Lillian's savings were modest, meant for her retirement, not some lavish trip. I glanced at her, but she was beaming, oblivious. I wanted to ask questions, to demand details, but the words stuck in my throat. Lauren chimed in, "I can't wait to vlog the Colosseum." And Ethan nodded, already planning his artistic posts. I felt like I was drowning in their noise. I reached for my water glass, my fingers shaky, and caught Dad's eye. He looked away, too fast, his hand twitching toward his pocket. Something was wrong. I leaned toward Lillian, whispering, "You okay?" She nodded, patting my arm. "I'm just so happy we're all together," she said. But I wasn't. The room felt too warm, the air too thick. I kept replaying Mom's words, contribution, planned, family. My parents didn't do family unless it served them. I wanted to grab Lillian and leave, but her smile anchored me. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe this was just their usual show. But as Mom raised her glass for a toast, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place, I knew I was walking into a trap. I just didn't know how deep it went or how it would break Lillian's heart. The clink of Mom's glass against the crystal centerpiece felt like a gavel, signaling the start of their performance. I sat rigid at the Thanksgiving table, Lillian's hand resting lightly on mine, her warmth the only thing keeping me from bolting. The dining room glowed under the chandelier, but the light didn't reach my parents' eyes. Diane and Richard were in their element, their smiles polished, their voices loud enough to drown out the unease crawling up my spine. They were selling something, and I was the only one not buying. Mom leaned forward, her red lipstick stark against her teeth, and launched into her spiel about the Europe trip. "It's going to be magical," she said, her hands gesturing like she was directing a play. "Paris at sunrise, Rome's ancient charm. Lillian, you'll love it." Lillian nodded, her fingers tightening around mine, her face glowing with a hope that made my chest ache. I wanted to believe it, but Mom's words felt rehearsed, like lines she'd practiced in front of a mirror. Dad chimed in, his voice booming. "We've handled everything. Flights, hotels, the works." He waved his hand, dismissing questions before they were asked. I caught his glance at Mom, a flicker of something sharp, and my stomach twisted. Lauren, ever the performer, clapped her hands. "I'm totally filming a reel at the Louvre," she said, flipping her hair. Ethan smirked, adding, I'm scouting galleries in Rome for my next exhibit. They're plus ones, some influencer types I didn't know, nodded along, their phones already out, snapping the table for their stories. I sat there, my fork untouched, watching the charade unfold. Lillian was eating it up, her eyes bright as she turned to me. Tara, imagine us all together in Paris, she whispered, her voice soft with dreams. I forced a smile, my throat tight because I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a setup. Then came the questions, the ones I knew were coming but still stung. Mom tilted her head, her smile syrupy. Tara, how's that nursing thing going? Still changing bedpans? Her laugh was light, but it cut like glass. Lauren snickered, and Ethan didn't even look up from his phone. I felt my face heat, my fingers curling under the table. It's going fine, I said, my voice steady despite the burn in my chest. Just saved a kid's life last week, no big deal. I meant it to sting, but Mom just waved it off. That's sweet, darling, but when are you going to do something ambitious? Dad nodded, adding, You could have been a doctor, Tara. Real impact. My nails bit into my palms, the pain grounding me. Lillian's hands squeezed mine, her touch a quiet defense. Tara's work is the most ambitious thing I know, she said, her voice firm but kind. Mom's smile faltered just for a second before she pivoted. Of course, Lillian, but this trip, it's for all of us to shine. She reached across the table, patting Lillian's arm, her rings glinting. I caught Dad's eyes again, and this time he didn't look away. There was something cold there, something calculated. My heart thudded. They were building to something, and I was the only one who seemed to notice the script. The conversation shifted back to the trip, Mom painting pictures of gondolas and cathedrals, her voice rising with each detail. Lillian hung on every word, her fingers tracing the edge of her scarf, the one she'd packed for Paris. I wanted to scream, to demand they explain what Lillian's contribution meant, but I didn't. Not yet. I kept my eyes on her, on the way she leaned forward, her smile so trusting it hurt. The food sat heavy on my plate, the turkey untouched, the wine sour in my mouth. Mom raised her glass again, toasting, to family, and everyone followed, except me. My hand stayed on Lillian's, my grip tight, as if I could protect her from what was coming. I didn't know the full truth yet. Didn't know they'd already taken her savings and planned to leave her at the airport. But as Dad's toast echoed, his voice too loud, I felt the ground shift. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a stage, and Lillian was the unwitting star of their cruelest act. The chandelier's light flickered as Mom set her wine glass down, her smile stretching too wide, like a mask about to crack. The Thanksgiving dinner had reached its peak, the table a battlefield of half-eaten turkey and forced laughter. Lillian's hand was still in mine, her fingers soft but trembling, her face lit with the hope of this family trip to Europe. I wanted to freeze time, to keep her in that moment of joy, but the air in my parents' dining room was thick with something rotten. Then it came, the moment that shattered everything. Dad cleared his throat, his chair creaking as he leaned back, his eyes glinting with a smugness I'd seen before, usually when he closed a deal. Lillian, he said, his voice smooth as oil, we need to talk about the trip. My heart stopped. Lillian tilted her head, her scarf slipping slightly, her smile faltering but still there. What's that, Richard? She asked, her voice light, trusting. Mom jumped in, her words sharp and too fast. We've finalized everything, but there's been a change. The flights, well, they were oversold, we had to adjust. I felt my pulse in my throat, my fingers tightening around Lillian's. Adjust how? I asked, my voice low, cutting through the clatter of forks. Lauren glanced up from her phone, her brow furrowed, and Ethan shifted, suddenly interested. Dad's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to Mom, a silent handoff. She leaned toward Lillian, her hand resting on the table like she was about to deliver good news. We used your savings, Lillian, $47,000, wasn't it, to secure the trip, but the group size was limited. You'll join us later, maybe next year. Her tone was casual, like she was discussing the weather. Lillian's hand went slack in mine, her breath catching. Later, she whispered, her voice so small it broke me. I pushed my chair back, the scrape loud in the silence. What are you saying? I demanded, my eyes locked on Dad. He sighed, like I was the one being difficult. Tara, don't make a scene. We took Lillian to the airport this morning, got her all set, but the flight was full. She'll stay here, and we'll handle the rest. My blood ran cold. I turned to Lillian, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. "You took me to the airport?" she said, her voice trembling. "But I thought—" Her words trailed off, and I saw it, the moment her heart cracked, her dream of Paris crumbling. "You left her there?" I said, my voice shaking, my hands clenched into fists. Mom rolled her eyes, waving a hand. "Tara, stop being dramatic. She was fine, just a little mix-up." Lillian's lips parted, but no sound came. Her fingers fumbled with her scarf, unraveling it like she was unraveling inside. I stood, my chair tipping slightly, and faced them. "You took her savings, her life's work, and left her at the airport alone?" My voice rose, raw and sharp. Lauren gasped, her phone forgotten, and Ethan muttered, "Whoa, wait, what?" Even their plus ones looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between us. Dad's face hardened. "Tara, sit down, this is a family matter." But I was done. "Family?" I snapped. "You stole from her, you lied to her face." Lillian's hand reached for mine, her touch cold now, and I knelt beside her, my eyes burning. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, but she just stared at the table, her breath uneven. Mom's laugh was brittle. "We didn't steal. It's an investment in our family's future. She'll get her turn." But Lillian's silence screamed louder than their excuses. I saw her shoulders slump, her hands folding into her lap, and I knew they'd broken her. I stood again, my voice steady now, cutting through their lies. "You're done. This ends now." Dad's jaw tightened and Mom started to speak, but I didn't hear her. All I saw was Lillian, her dreams stolen, her trust betrayed. I didn't know how I'd fix this, but as I held her hand, my resolve hardened. They'd crossed a line, and I'd make sure they paid for it, not just for Lillian, but for every time they'd made us feel less than. The room was silent, the weight of their cruelty exposed, and I knew this was only the beginning of our fight. Lillian's silence was louder than any scream, her hand limp in mine as the Thanksgiving table sat frozen, the air thick with the stench of my parents' betrayal. I knelt beside her, my knees pressing into the hardwood, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Her scarf had fallen to the floor, a crumpled green heap, and her eyes, usually so bright, were dull, staring at the untouched pie she'd baked with such care. My parents' words, "flights oversold, investment, next year," echoed in my head, each one a knife. They'd taken her $47,000, her dream of Europe, and left her at the airport like she was nothing. I wasn't just angry, I was done. I stood, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "I'm staying with Lillian," I said, looking straight at Mom, whose lips parted in a fake gasp. Dad's face reddened, his fork clattering against his plate. "Tara, you're overreacting," he snapped, but I didn't flinch. "Overreacting?" I said, my voice rising. "You stole her life savings and abandoned her. You're not family, you're thieves." Lauren's eyes widened, her phone forgotten, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his cool guy act crumbling. Their plus ones stared at their plates, forks hovering, as if they could disappear into the mashed potatoes. Lillian's breath hitched, and I squeezed her hand, anchoring her to me. "We're leaving," I said, helping Lillian to her feet. Her movements were slow, like she was wading through molasses, but she leaned into me, her trust a lifeline. Mom stood, her heels clicking, her voice sharp. "Tara, sit down, you're embarrassing us." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. "Embarrassing you? You should be ashamed." I grabbed Lillian's coat from the rack, draping it over her shoulders, my fingers brushing her trembling arms. Dad tried again, his tone softer, manipulative. "Let's talk this out, kid, no need to ruin the holiday." But I was already guiding Lillian to the door, her pie tin left behind, a small piece of her heart abandoned with it. Outside, the November air was sharp, cutting through my dress as I helped Lillian into my car. She hadn't spoken, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind racing. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," I whispered, my voice cracking. She turned to me, her eyes wet but fierce. "You didn't do this, Tara," she said, her voice low but steady. "They did." Those words lit a fire in me. I wasn't just going to comfort her, I was going to fight for her. As I drove to her house, the streetlights blurring through my tears, I made a vow. "We're getting your money back," I said, glancing at her, "and they're going to pay for this." Lillian nodded, her lips pressed tight, and I saw a spark of her old strength. Back at her house, I settled her on the couch, wrapping her quilt around her shoulders. She clutched it, her fingers tracing the stitches she'd made years ago. I trusted them, she whispered, and my heart broke all over again. I knelt in front of her, my hands on hers. I know, but I'm here, and we're going to fix this. That night, I sat at her kitchen table, my phone glowing as I searched for answers. My nursing shifts had taught me how to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This was personal. I typed elder abuse lawyer into the search bar, my fingers shaking. Pages of results popped up, and I scrolled until I found a local firm with reviews that spoke of compassion and results. I saved the number, my resolve hardening. We're not just getting your money back, I told Lillian, who was sipping tea, her eyes still distant. We're making sure they never hurt you again. She looked at me, a small smile breaking through. My fighter, she said, and I felt the weight of her trust settle on me. I wasn't just her granddaughter anymore. I was her shield, and I'd go to war for her. The fluorescent lights in the lawyer's office buzzed softly, a stark contrast to the warmth of Lillian's kitchen where I'd spent the night, her quilt still draped over my shoulders as I made calls. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and I sat across from Ms. Carla Reyes, an elder abuse lawyer, whose sharp eyes and steady voice felt like a lifeline. Lillian was at home, resting, her face still pale from yesterday's betrayal, but I'd promised her I'd take the first step. My hands were clammy, folded tightly in my lap, as I recounted how my parents had drained her $47,000 savings and left her stranded at the airport. Every word felt like a stone I was laying for justice, and I wasn't stopping until the wall was built. Ms. Reyes leaned forward, her pen poised over a legal pad, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun. Tara, she said, her voice calm but firm, what you're describing is financial elder abuse, plain and simple. I nodded, my throat tight, the weight of the term sinking in. Abuse. It was the right word, but hearing it out loud made my stomach churn. I shifted in the chair, my fingers twisting the hem of my sweater. They took everything she saved for decades, I said, my voice low. She thought it was for a family trip, but they never planned to include her. Ms. Reyes's pen scratched across the page, her jaw tightening as I described Lillian's crumpled scarf, her broken trust, the way Mom had laughed it off like it was nothing. I pulled out the documents I'd found at Lillian's house that morning, bank statements I'd dug through while she slept, her signature scrawled on a transfer form dated 2 weeks ago. My hands shook as I handed them over, the numbers glaring. $47,000 moved to an account I didn't recognize. They convinced her to sign this, I said, my voice cracking. She thought it was for the trip. Ms. Reyes's eyes narrowed as she scanned the papers, her fingers tapping the desk. This is fraud, she said. We can build a case, Tara, but it won't be easy. Family cases never are. I met her gaze, my resolve like steel. I don't care how hard it is. They don't get to walk away from this. She outlined the process, filing a civil lawsuit for financial elder abuse, requesting a freeze on my parents' assets, and potentially pursuing criminal charges. Each step sounded like a mountain, but I saw Lillian's face in my mind, her trembling hands, her whispered, I trusted them. And I knew I'd climb them all. What about her inheritance rights? I asked, leaning forward. They're counting on her estate someday. Can we stop that? Ms. Reyes's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but a nod of approval. We can petition to challenge their inheritance based on this abuse, she said. It's a strong case, especially with these documents. My heart lifted, a spark of hope cutting through the anger. I glanced at my phone, a text from Lillian glowing on the screen. You're my strength, Tara. My eyes stung, but I blinked it back, focusing on Ms. Reyes as she mapped out the next steps, gathering more evidence, getting Lillian's statement, and filing an emergency motion to freeze the account where her money had gone. Your parents might fight back, she warned, her voice steady. They could claim it was a gift or a misunderstanding. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Let them try. I said, I know the truth, and so does Lillian. As I left her office, the winter air hit my face sharp and grounding. I clutched the folder of paperwork Ms. Reyes had given me, my steps quickening as I headed to my car. My parents thought they'd won, thought they could use Lillian's trust and toss her aside. But I was done being invisible, done letting them hurt her. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands steady now, and dialed Lillian. We've got a plan, I told her, my voice firm. They're not getting away with this. Her soft, I know you'll fix it, Tara, was all I needed. The fight was on, and I was ready to make them pay. Not just for the money, but for every tear Lillian had shed. Lillian's living room was a haven of warmth, the kind that wrapped around you like a hug after the cold sterility of my parents' betrayal. It was 2 days after Thanksgiving, and I sat cross-legged on her couch, a tray of her homemade oatmeal cookies between us. The late afternoon light filtered through her lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the quilt draped over her lap. Her hands, still trembling slightly from the shock of my parents' actions, cradled a mug of tea, but her eyes held a flicker of the strength I'd always loved. This moment, just the two of us, was everything my parents' glittering dining room could never be. Real, grounded, full of love. It stood in stark contrast to their cold deception. And it reminded me who my true family was. I reached for a cookie, its edges crumbling, and broke it in half, handing her the bigger piece. "You didn't have to bake," I said, my voice soft, but she waved me off, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Keeps my hands busy," she said, her voice steadier than it had been since the dinner. I watched her nibble the cookie, her fingers brushing crumbs onto a napkin, and felt a pang of gratitude. She was still here, still fighting, and I'd do anything to keep that spark alive. "Tara," she said, setting her mug down, "you didn't have to stay with me through this mess." Her eyes met mine, glistening but fierce. I shook my head, my throat tight. "Yes, I did. You're my home. We talked about the lawyer, Miss Reyes, and the case we were building." I kept it simple, not wanting to overwhelm her, but I told her about the frozen account, the lawsuit, the chance to cut my parents out of her inheritance. Her brow furrowed, and she twisted the edge of the quilt, her fingers slow but deliberate. "I never thought Diane could do this," she whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of her daughter's betrayal. I leaned closer, my hand on hers, feeling the warmth of her skin. "I know," I said, "but we're going to make it right." She nodded, her lips pressed tight, and I saw the resolve in her, a quiet strength that had carried her through years of hardship. The contrast to that Thanksgiving dinner hit me hard. There, under my parents' chandelier, everything was a performance. Mom's fake tears, Dad's calculated smiles, Lauren and Ethan playing their parts in the charade. Here with Lillian, it was just us. No filters, no lies. I thought of how Mom had patted Lillian's arm, her rings glinting, promising a trip that was never real. I thought of Dad's smirk, the way he'd dismissed Lillian's pain like it was an inconvenience. My jaw clenched, but Lillian's voice pulled me back. "You're my fighter, Tara," she said, her hand squeezing mine. I smiled, my heart swelling because she was mine too. We spent the afternoon like that, sharing cookies and stories, the kind of quiet moments that stitched us closer. She told me about Grandpa again, how he'd promised her Paris, how they'd saved pennies in a jar for it. Her voice softened, her eyes distant but warm. And I listened, my elbow resting on the couch, my chin in my hand. I didn't tell her about my own secret savings, the account I'd started for her dream trip. But I felt it like a promise in my chest. "We'll get there someday," I said, and her smile was enough to keep me going. As the sun dipped lower, casting the room in gold, I helped her to the kitchen, her steps slow but steady. She insisted on washing the mugs, her hands moving under the faucet, and I dried them, standing shoulder to shoulder. This was family, not the polished lie my parents sold, but this, the quiet, the real. I didn't need their approval, their spotlight. I had Lillian, and she had me. And as I tucked the quilt around her later, her breathing soft as she dozed, I knew I'd fight for her with everything I had. The lawsuit was just the start. This was about protecting the only family that mattered. The lawyer's office felt like a war room, the air thick with the weight of what we were building. It was a week after Thanksgiving, and I sat across from Ms. Carla Reyes, her desk stacked with folders and a laptop glowing with case notes. My hands were steady now, clutching a notepad where I'd scribbled every detail I could remember about my parents' betrayal. Dates, bank statements, Mom's smug smile as she dismissed Lillian's pain. The fight to freeze my parents' inheritance rights and recover Lillian's $47,000 was in full swing, and today's meeting was about setting boundaries that would protect her for good. I wasn't just seeking justice. I was carving out a fortress to shield Lillian from their greed forever. Miss Reyes leaned forward, her pen tapping the desk rhythmically. "Tara, we've got traction," she said, her voice calm but edged with purpose. The court approved the emergency motion to freeze the account where your parents transferred Lillian's money. My shoulders relaxed slightly, a breath I didn't know I'd been holding slipping out. I pictured Mom's face when she'd realize her shopping sprees were on hold, Dad's jaw tightening when his business deals hit a wall. "What's next?" I asked, my pen hovering over my notes. She slid a document toward me, dense with legal jargon. "We're filing for a protective order to limit their contact with Lillian," she said, "and we're moving to amend her will to exclude them from inheritance." My heart thudded, a mix of relief and rage. Excluding them felt right, but it also meant confronting the reality of cutting my parents out of our lives. I thought of Lillian at home, her hands folded over her quilt, her trust in me, unwavering. "They'll fight this," I said, my voice low, my fingers tightening around the pen. Ms. Reyes nodded, her eyes steady. "They will. They've already hired a lawyer, claiming the money was a gift." I scoffed, my nails digging into my palm. "A gift? They'd left her at the airport, her dreams in tatters." "Let them try," I said, my voice hard. "We have the truth." The truth was our weapon. Miss Reyes had Lillian's statement, recorded yesterday in her living room. I'd sat beside her, holding her hand as she recounted signing the transfer form, believing it was for the family trip. Her voice had shaken, but her words were clear, each one a brick in our case. I'd also handed over texts from Mom, vague promises about sorting out the trip, and Dad's dismissive, "Don't worry about it," when I'd asked for details. Ms. Reyes flipped through her notes, her brow furrowed. "Your parents' lawyer is pushing for mediation," she said. "They want to settle quietly." I shook my head, my jaw tight. "No deals. They don't get to walk away." We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. Subpoenas for bank records, witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Lillian's distress, even a deposition from me about the Thanksgiving dinner. My hands cramped from writing, but I didn't stop. Every detail mattered. Ms. Reyes paused, looking at me over her glasses. "Tara, this could get ugly. Family cases do. Are you ready for that?" I thought of Lillian's crumpled scarf, her whispered. I trusted them and nodded. "I'm ready. For her." Leaving the office, I felt the weight of the fight, but also a clarity I hadn't expected. My parents had always made me feel small, invisible, but now I was the one drawing the line. I drove to Lillian's, the winter sun low, casting long shadows. She was in her garden, bundled in a coat, clipping dead roses with shaky hands. I joined her, my boots crunching on frost, and told her about the meeting. "They can't touch you anymore," I said, my voice firm. She looked up, her eyes soft but resolute. "I know, Tara, you're my wall." I hugged her, her coat scratchy against my cheek, and felt the fortress solidifying, not just in court but between us. My parents could fight, but they'd never break through. This was our boundary, and I'd guard it with everything I had. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, a quiet weight settling over me as I sat beside Lillian, her hand clasped in mine. It was mid-December, weeks after the Thanksgiving betrayal, and the judge's gavel had just sealed our victory. The civil lawsuit for financial elder abuse was over. My parents' account was frozen, Lillian's $47,000 ordered returned, and their inheritance rights to her estate severed. I felt my chest loosen, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Lillian's fingers, frail but warm, squeezed mine, and I looked at her, her green scarf neatly knotted, her eyes bright with a pride that made my heart swell. This wasn't just about the money, it was about honoring her legacy, rewriting our family's story with love and justice instead of greed. The hearing had been brutal. My parents sat across the room, Mom's face pinched, her designer purse clutched like a shield, Dad's jaw tight as he avoided my gaze. Their lawyer argued the money was a family investment, but Ms. Reyes dismantled it, presenting Lillian's bank statements, her tearful statement, and my own testimony about that Thanksgiving dinner. I'd stood in the witness box, my hands steady despite the knot in my stomach, and described Mom's smug smile, Dad's dismissive wave, the way Lillian's hope had crumbled. The judge's eyes softened when Lillian spoke, her voice steady as she recounted her trust in them, her abandonment at the airport. My parents had no defense, only deflections, and the judge saw through it. Now, as we left the courthouse, the winter air sharp against my face, I felt the weight of what we'd done. Lillian's steps were slow but sure, her arm looped through mine as we walked to my car. "Tara," she said, her voice soft but clear, you gave me back my dignity." My throat tightened and I hugged her, her scarf brushing my cheek. "You never lost it," I whispered, my eyes stinging. We drove to her house, the radio off, the silence comfortable, filled with the unspoken bond we'd forged through this fight. At home, I helped her settle on her couch, her quilt tucked around her. I pulled out a photo album from her shelf, one she'd shown me years ago, filled with pictures of her and Grandpa, smiling at a fair, dancing at their wedding. "This is what family looks like," I said, pointing to a photo of them laughing, her head on his shoulder. She smiled, her fingers tracing the image. "And you, Tara? You're my family." I sat beside her, the album open between us, and we talked about what came next. Not just recovering the money, but building something new. I told her about my secret savings, the account I'd started for her dream trip to Europe. Her eyes widened, a laugh escaping her. "You sneaky girl," she said, swatting my arm lightly. That evening, I called Miss Reyes to thank her, my voice steady but thick with gratitude. "You changed our lives," I said, and she chuckled, her tone warm. "You did the hard part, Tara. You fought for her." I hung up, my gaze drifting to Lillian, now dozing, her hands folded over the quilt. I thought of my parents, their legacy tarnished, their greed exposed. They'd tried to call me after the ruling, Mom's voicemail, a mix of tears and excuses. Dad's a curt demand to talk sense. I deleted them, my finger steady on the screen. They didn't get to rewrite this story. I opened my laptop, pulling up travel sites, my heart light as I scrolled through pictures of Paris, Rome, the places Lillian had dreamed of. This was my chance to reclaim our family's name. Not as a monument to my parents' vanity, but as a testament to love, to Lillian's resilience, to the fight we'd won. I bookmarked a tour, my fingers hovering over the keys, imagining her face when I'd tell her we were going. This was our legacy now, built on justice in the quiet moments that mattered. And as I closed the laptop, Lillian's soft snores filling the room, I knew we'd already won something bigger than any courtroom could give. Lillian's garden was a quiet sanctuary, the late December sun filtering through bare rose bushes as I sat on her porch, a mug of coffee warming my hands. It was a week after the courtroom victory, and the weight of the fight, my parents' betrayal, the lawsuit, the severed ties, had settled into something softer, something like peace. Lillian was inside, humming as she watered her plants, her green scarf draped over a chair, a sign she was reclaiming her joy. I leaned back, the wooden bench creaking, and let my thoughts drift. This journey from that shattering Thanksgiving to now wasn't just about justice. It was about finding my worth, not in my parents' eyes, but in my own, and in the love I shared with Lillian. I thought back to the girl I used to be, always chasing Mom and Dad's approval, my nursing scrubs a silent rebellion against their polished world. Every ignored achievement, every backhanded compliment had built a wall of doubt inside me. But fighting for Lillian tore it down. I remembered her face in the courtroom, her hands steady as she spoke her truth, and the way she'd called me her fighter. That wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror, showing me who I was. Not invisible, not less than, but enough. More than enough. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I set the mug down, my fingers tracing the grain of the bench, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Lillian stepped onto the porch, her cardigan loose around her shoulders, and sat beside me. "You're thinking too hard," she teased, her voice warm. I laughed, leaning my head against her shoulder, her lavender scent grounding me. "Just thinking about us," I said. "How we got here." She nodded, her hand finding mine, her fingers worn but strong. "We got here because you didn't give up," she said. I looked at her, her eyes crinkling with a smile, and realized she'd given me more than love. She'd given me purpose. Protecting her wasn't just a fight against my parents. It was a fight for the life we deserved, one built on trust, not transactions. I thought about the money, now safely back in Lillian's account, and the inheritance rights my parents had lost. They'd called again yesterday, Mom's voice tearful, Dad's angry, but I didn't answer. Their world of likes and lies had no hold on me anymore. Instead, I'd spent the morning finalizing a surprise for Lillian. A trip to Paris, booked with my own savings, the ones I'd tucked away for her dream. I hadn't told her yet, but the thought of her face when I did made my heart lift. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming joy, hers and mine, and proving that family is what you build, not what you're born into. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, I felt a stillness I hadn't known before. I didn't need my parents' validation, didn't need their spotlight. I had Lillian, her quiet strength, her unwavering love. I had my work, my patience, the lives I touched every day. And I had myself, the woman who'd fought and won, not just in court but in the mirror. I squeezed Lillian's hand, her warmth anchoring me, and knew this was enough, this was peace. Have you ever had to fight for someone you love, to stand up when everything feels stacked against you? That's what this journey with Lillian taught me, that real strength comes from protecting what matters, from choosing love over lies. I'd love to hear your stories, drop them in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define family on their own terms. We don't need the world's applause to know our worth. Lillian and I found ours in the quiet moments, and the fight we won together, and you can too. Keep fighting for what's real. You've got this.